All right. What is going on, folks? Welcome back to the Make Fitness Make Sense podcast. We're kicking off episode number 4. Per the usual, I'm your host, Coach JK McLeod. And today on the Make Fitness Make Sense podcast, I'm going to talk with you about body recomposition. I'm going to try to help you make sense of actually what body recomposition or what a body recomp phase is actually all about. Again, try and make sense of it so that you can hopefully feel less frustrated or less confused about how it differs from a specific fat loss phase, a specific muscle gain phase, a specific weight loss phase, whatever the case may be. It's a term that is thrown around quite a bit, and mostly full transparency, I am getting ready to go into a year-long body recomp phase very, very soon. So it's very front of mind for me. And it's something that I will periodically have conversations with folks about, especially as a coach who primarily focuses on habits-based approach to nutrition. So before going into that, though, I as always want to say thank you for choosing to press play on the Make Fitness Make Sense podcast. I know that you have no shortage of podcast content that you can and probably do consume, especially within the fitness space. So I truly, truly never take it for granted that you chose to press play on Make Fitness Make Sense. All right, so let's get into it. So first of all, when we're talking about the different phases, we're generally talking about different ways that nutrition is being handled. So you've got a fat loss phase where you are consuming food and drink in a caloric deficit, which means that, let's say if you estimate your estimated maintenance is around 2,000 calories, then you would be eating and drinking, because many times we talk about how much we eat and drink, those calories would add up to less than 2,000 calories. So you are going to basically utilize more energy than you're putting in. That puts you in a caloric deficit, and that can lead to weight loss and or fat loss. Maybe I'll do a future episode on the difference between weight loss and fat loss. Right now, we'll just identify both of those being something that happens within a calorie deficit. So you've got your fat loss phase. Then you have your muscle gain phase. More often than not, especially for those who are experienced lifters, people who have done resistance training for an extended period of time. Let's say you have spent at least a year or two doing specific resistance training. You're not new to strength training at all. Then you will likely, in a muscle gain phase, you will likely need to eat more than you burn. So you'll need to be in what we call a calorie surplus. So in fat loss, you're in a calorie deficit. In muscle gain, again, for those who are already at least at the intermediate level with lifting weights, whether it be dumbbells, kettlebells, machines, and so on, you will likely need to be in some sort of a caloric surplus in order to gain muscle. So those are the two main phases that are talked about, I'd say, the most. Over the last handful of years, let's say conservatively, I'm going to say over the last 5 years, and maybe further back than that within the bodybuilding space. However, if we're talking just the general population, I would say over the past 5-ish years, like right around 2020-ish, is when the term body recomposition really started to become more prevalent. So in terms of simplicity, body recomp, same as body recomposition, just, shorter because the extra syllables are really draining a lot of energy. Body recomp is the process of losing fat and building muscle at the same time with potentially a slight change to overall body weight. So they're generally the amount of weight that you're going to lose in a fat loss phase is going to be more than the amount of weight generally that you're going to lose in a body recomp phase. And there's reasons for that, because you are, again, as body recomp is defined, it's a process of losing fat and building muscle. So you are prioritizing that muscle mass at the same time. Okay, so that's body recomp. So I've got, what did I jot down here? I took my three categories that I typically will focus on, my three pillars of foundational fitness habits. So eat well, sleep enough, and exercise regularly. So we're talking your nutrition, your training, and your sleep. I took those three things and jotted down a handful of things underneath those that I would recommend as suggestions for things to focus on when you are looking to do a body recomp phase. So one thing that I want to get into before that is trying to provide some advice here on who body recomp can be best for. From my perspective, body recomp can be a great goal for someone who doesn't have what I'm going to call an imminent event driving the goal that they have. An imminent event outside of a medical emergency. All right. So I am talking about just generally overall, as I'm approaching this particular topic, I am approaching this topic from the angle of the average everyday person. I'm not going to say that they never have medical issues or haven't experienced medical issues. I'm going to say that this is not some I'm not making this particular episode from the angle of somebody who has just received a diagnosis about their health, and now if they don't lose the weight, or if they don't change their body composition in a specific amount of time, then they are looking potentially at developing like diabetes or death or something like that. I'm not saying that this can't work. I'm trying to be as clear as I can around the filter that I'm giving this particular advice and opinion on. All right. So again, body recomp, I believe, is a really solid goal to have for somebody who doesn't have a specific imminent event. So when I say imminent event, I'm talking things like a vacation that's coming up in the next 6 to 8 weeks, say in the next couple of months. Maybe getting ready for a photo shoot, whether that be a photo shoot for your business, if you are within either the fitness, some sort of fitness or wellness space, or in a particular space where you're just going to be doing a photo shoot and you just want to feel really good about how you look during that particular photo shoot. Like, not every photo shoot is going to be something where a whole lot of skin is showing, or a wedding, whether it be your wedding or you're attending a wedding. Those are the three that kind of came to mind. Especially holidays can be an imminent event for folks too. So if we just had 4th of July here in the States. For anybody who's listening outside, shout out any international listeners. You've also got other holidays where things are, it's warmer weather. You're going to be maybe at a pool, at a beach, at a lake. You're wearing less clothing. Things like that. So if you don't have some sort of imminent event or imminent time frame or imminent season coming up, I believe that body recomp can be a very, very solid approach or a solid phase to go into. Generally, I also do think that a habits-based approach can be really, really solid for body recomp, because with a habits-based approach versus prioritizing like very, very strict tracking of, let's say, things like macros, because nutrition is what really drives a decent amount of this. A habits-based approach would be something like, and I'll give some suggestions about this in the nutrition section when I get to that. I'll get to that second after sleep. A habits-based approach would be something like getting in 3 or more servings of protein per day, getting in like 4 or more servings of fruits and vegetables, like quantifying things that way, versus a macro-based approach where it's making sure that you're hitting specific macronutrient targets each day. Again, that's one of the reasons why I think that with a body recomp approach, and especially pair that with like a habits-based thing, that can be really solid for folks who have already been in the game for quite some time. When I say in the game, I'm talking you've been strength training, like specific resistance training. You're not new to that. You've been doing it for at least a year. So you have a good idea of like sets, reps, tempo. You understand progressive overload, and I'll get into some of that in a bit. You also are decently familiar with being able to understand what 25 to 30 grams of protein generally looks like. And I'm not talking like, that certain protein bars or certain protein shakes have that. You're generally able to say like eyeball like a chicken breast and understand that, okay, that's about 30 to 40 grams based on what I normally eat, things like that. So habits-based approach can be really solid for a body recomp phase. Now, a couple of things that I want to point out before going into some suggestions for how you can handle your sleep, your nutrition, and your training during body recomp. Very often it is said that in comparison to a fat loss phase, body recomp is an approach that you can take, but it's going to take a bit longer. And that's a phrase that I hear all the time. It'll just take a little bit longer. I am here not to burst your bubble, but I might possibly like stretch it a little bit. Body recomp, by definition, takes significantly longer for the most part than a fat loss phase, because in a fat loss phase, you are specifically operating in that caloric deficit. Many fat loss phases tend to be more aggressive, and they also are shorter. You can have, fat loss phases can go for quite a while depending on how much weight the person has to lose, also how adherent they are or are not to the fat loss phase. But let's generally say, like most fat loss phases, typically you're not looking at more than 16 weeks. I would say most tend to be somewhere in the 8 to 12 week mark. Again, that just kind of depends. That's for a fat loss phase. For body recomp, we are looking at a significantly longer period of time. So where I would say like generally 8 to 12 weeks for something like body recomp. So what is that? Like 2 to 3 months, I would say, or excuse me, for fat loss, I'd say 8 to 12 weeks, which would be 2 to 3 months. I would say for a body recomp phase, at minimum, I'd be recommending 4 months, if not 4 to 6, as far as like the baseline and the minimum. For myself, I'm actually looking at going over a full year, starting around September, like right around September, potentially going into that particular phase. So with a body recomp phase, it is going to take a longer period of time than a fat loss phase. Again, strap in for somewhere 4 to 6 months as your minimum. The more experienced that you are when it comes to especially your level of fitness, the more experienced that you are with lifting, the more experienced that you've been, more experience that you have with your nutrition and understanding the ebbs and flows and different phases that you likely have done before, then I recommend shifting your mindset to understand that it will be a longer time frame, because a good amount of the different things that you're going to be doing are not going to be new. Like it's not going to be new for you to be pushing the level of training that you're doing. It's not going to be new for you to get your steps in. It's not going to be new for you to make sure that you're drinking enough water. So the changes that you will see are going to be very incremental. I guess all change is incremental, really, but you pick up what I'm putting down. When we use the phrase like changes are going to be incremental, they're going to be small, like little tiny things that take longer to really see and notice. So one of the recommendations that I have, and I'll remind you of this at the end here, is when you're going through body recomp, really dial in taking photos and measurements, because they're going to tell way more of the story of your progress during that body recomp phase than the scale will, because there's such a focus during body recomp on holding on to and ideally building muscle as you're in the process of losing body fat or minimizing body fat. So the changes on the scale are not going to be anywhere near as significant or noticeable as they potentially would be with a fat loss phase. They're just not going to be. Okay, let's get into some suggestions that I've got for you. And again, I've separated those into 3 categories. If you're not familiar with my foundational fitness habits, the pieces of the Habits OS, the operating system, they are eat well, sleep enough, and exercise regularly. So let's actually start with the sleep, because this is a short one here, not to be mistaken with something that's not important. It's just a shorter thing because I didn't take a lot of notes in that section. So when it comes to sleep during a body recomp phase, I recommend that you focus on getting at least 7 hours or 7 hours or more of sleep each night. Getting a solid amount of sleep is really important in any phase. So a lot of this stuff really could carry over to any of the phases, but today we're talking about body recomp. So 7+ hours per night. Some things to watch out for. Be really cognizant of signs where less than functional sleep is starting to have a carryover effect. And I caught myself from saying less than optimal because optimal can be really different for each person. So if you're able to identify that for yourself, cool. What I would say is be cognizant of signs where your sleep is less than functional. So signs that your sleep is less than functional and having a carryover effect in no particular order. One, you've got more soreness from your workouts. I get it. Everybody does like that leg day that's a complete banger and your butt cheeks are on fire for, days afterwards and things like that. While that is fantastic and can be a sign of a really solid stimulus that's happening, it's not something that should leave you incapacitated and not able to sit down and take a dump for the next week and a half. That is not what we're going for. Even my clients, when they are experiencing things like that, that may happen during the first week of a brand new program that we've written, and we've switched up exactly how we're attacking particular body parts. However, after ideally no longer than the second time you've gone through that workout, then you should feel like you've lifted. So not pain, but you should feel like you've lifted. And within a couple of days, or a day or two, that should pretty much subside. So if you are noticing that you've got soreness from those workouts that's continuing to linger on top of nutrition, that could also be something that is an issue with your sleep and your recovery there. If you are finding it tougher to stick with your nutrition plan, your nutritional guidelines, especially after you've had a really, really stressful day, then sometimes you can pull on that thread. I'm going to tread lightly here because my intention here is not to identify like disordered eating patterns in any way, shape, or form. One of the things, if you have identified like, man, I just noticed when I get home at night, it's like I am ravenous and I can't stop eating. It's just like go, go, go. When I get home from work and I finally get time to like sit down on the couch, I just can't stop eating. When you pull that thread, sometimes you can pull that thread to, okay, well, I had just like a really stressful day at work, and a culmination of those things. Plus, while I was at work, I was getting messages from like so-and-so, and then I had to deal with that. And then when you pull on that thread, it's like, and I had a bad night of sleep the night before. So I just wasn't feeling it all day. That can also be a sign that your sleep, even if it's at 7 hours, maybe you're looking to get a little bit more and or improve the quality of your sleep. Those are signs that your sleep potentially is less than functional. So that is something that is still going to be important in a body recomposition phase. So body recomp, focusing on sleep 7 or more hours a night is ideal. Last note that I've got on that, I will tell you, I do not average 7 hours of sleep each night. So one of the things that I am testing out starting this week in preparation for later going into a short fat loss phase and then going into body recomp is changing the number of days that I actually weight train. So right now I am testing going to 3 days of lifting per week. And I have not done 3 sessions per week. I can't even remember the last time. And I've been lifting, I started lifting around 2010-ish, 2009 or 10. So this is a new experiment for me, because typically I've been somewhere from 4 to 6 days over the last like almost 15 years. So that's a different episode. All right. So that's sleep. All right, let's now get into nutrition. This is what everybody loves to talk about. So how to handle nutrition in a body recomp phase. Overall, remember that because our primary focus is losing fat and building muscle at the same time in a body recomp phase, nutrition-wise, we are, for the most part, eating at maintenance with some days at a moderate deficit. A moderate deficit, I generally will range that somewhere from about 250 to 400 calories deficit. And that's on average each day, not each week. So on average, if I believe that my nutritional maintenance is around 2,000 calories, then I'd be looking at anywhere from 1600 to 1750. I think that I did the math right. So let's call it like 16 to 1800 calories, which is considered a moderate to mild deficit. I would generally say that anything over 400 or anything that's a deeper cut than 400 or 500 or than 400 would be considered starting to go into the aggressive category when it comes to your calorie cuts. So again, from a body recomp standpoint, you're going to be eating at maintenance most days with occasional days where you are actually intentionally eating in a deficit. So that's one of the things that can be very different from, or that should be very different from a fat loss phase. Remember that from a fat loss standpoint, if you're in a fat loss phase, and this is why those fat loss phases are much shorter, is because you are intentionally giving your body less energy than it needs for the amount of activity. And I'm not just talking workouts. I did a whole episode on Help Me Understand around TDEE, total daily energy expenditure, and the ways that we actually utilize energy throughout the day, because it's not just your workouts. I'm actually utilizing energy here right now doing this podcast as my hands move around and things like that. So because in a fat loss phase, we are being very intentional about taking in less fuel than we need to put out, we are operating in that deficit. In a body recomp phase, which we're spreading out over a longer period of time, we will have days for sure that we are operating in that deficit. And also that deficit is typically going to be very mild. Again, generally somewhere in the 250 to 400 calorie range. That can be very different from person to person. Again, I do think that a habits-based approach can work very well here from a nutrition standpoint because you do have that longer time frame. Something I want to mention is that a habits-based approach isn't just a free-for-all with flexibility. I think that that's a mistake that a lot of people make and that gets lost in some sort of weird translation. Just because we're focused on habits and we say we're going to do a habits-based approach, and trust me, I am like the habits guy. I eat, sleep, breathe habits. It's like my seventh love language. I love habits. And also, habits still require some rules and some guidelines. They just do. It's like just because you are focusing on habits doesn't mean that there aren't parameters that you stay within. Think about it like if you're driving down the road, there are still, maybe because you're doing a habits-based approach, you've got 5 lanes on the highway and you operate between like the middle 3, as opposed to if you're taking more of a very specific numbers-driven, data-driven approach as far as what your inputs are going to be, like your macro counting and weighing and measuring the majority of your food, then that's not a 5-lane highway. That's primarily going to be like 2 lanes for the most part, because you gotta keep it pretty much not super strict, but you got to keep it in the road, to kill that analogy. So some rules and guardrails that I'll put in place during a body recomp phase where we're really focusing primarily on a habits-based approach would be to set a protein goal. And when I say a protein goal, I'm talking about servings of protein. So 3 or more servings of protein, setting a goal for fruits and vegetables. So 4 or more servings of fruits and vegetables. Water. I generally like to have folks around taking whatever their body weight is, divide that by 2. So just cut it in half. And then that's how many ounces of water. So if I weighed 200 pounds, generally I'm looking to get in somewhere around 100 ounces of water per day. And then steps. Actually, we'll cover that in the training section. But those are some things that I would look at from a nutrition standpoint. Suggestions that I've got for you if you are looking for something really specific. If you are looking to figure out what your macros would be and you're not specifically wanting to use an app or anything like that, then I recommend going on the Precision Nutrition website. They have a fantastic calculator. And when you enter your information into that, it will also, yes, it's going to collect your information. It'll collect your email. It's worth it because they will then send you this whole packet that outlines for you some very good suggestions, no matter how experienced you are, some really solid suggestions for how to hit those particular macros, how to work your way up to it. And also they'll teach you the PALM method where you can get a general idea of eyeballing how much you want as far as like fats, how many carbs, how much protein, using the size of your hand. Is it perfect? Absolutely not. However, body recomp, we've got a longer period of time and we've got a little bit more flexibility within the 3 lanes of that 5-lane highway that we're operating in, remember. So that's what I suggest: precision nutrition, if you're looking for a calculator to figure out your macros and don't want to use an app. If you do want to use an app, I know there are plenty of them out there. I have not used them all. I'm a fan of Macro Factor. If you are looking to use something that's app based, there is the option in Macro Factor to do a coached option where it'll utilize like the AI algorithm that it has, that they are constantly, it seems like, updating. They're very transparent about the things that they do there. So Macro Factor would be my suggestion if you're trying to attack your nutrition from a app-based standpoint. And that's full disclosure again, like when I'm going through body recomp, I will primarily use Macro Factor and track 3 days per week at the most. It might even do a little bit less than that, but generally I'll do like 3 days a week because that's how much it needs in order to stay consistent with how it's calculating benchmarks. So there's a suggestion for you too. So again, just to wrap up the nutrition portion of the body recomp phase, you are primarily eating at maintenance, not a specific surplus here. Okay. So you're generally eating at an average of maintenance, and also including some days where you have a moderate deficit. So I'd say over a 7-day period, then we'd potentially be looking at something like a 4 days at maintenance, 3 days in a deficit, or a 5 and 2, just kind of depending on how your lifestyle flows. Some people like to do like a 3 on, 1 off, 2 on, 1 off, like go that sort of way. And to me, there's no perfect rhythm or method to it. That's something that takes trial and error. So just take your time working through that. All right, last but certainly not least, because this is my bread and butter, so to speak, carbs and fats, training and recovery. So talking about some suggestions that I have for training during a body recomp phase. I would be looking at three or more. I would say 3 to 4 really solid, like I am focused, I am in here doing the work, strength training sessions per week. Those 3 strength training sessions per week overall should average to hitting about 8 to 10 really hard sets for each of your muscle groups. I'll get to that in a minute, because 3 strength training sessions per week, even that sometimes can be really vague because there's a difference. 3 strength training sessions per week makes the assumption that you're following a well-designed training program, humbly, like mine. So 3 strength training sessions per week, I would say around 2 hours, let's say like the 150 minutes of moderate intensity cardio. So this is going to be like your zone 2, whether that is for some people like a jog. I still am not at the point where I can jog in zone 2 or anything close to zone 2. That immediately goes to like zone 4 and beyond for me. But around 150 minutes of moderate intensity. So moderate intensity would be something where you can still hold a conversation. You just may need to periodically be like, hang on just a minute, let me just catch my breath just a little bit. But for the most part, you can hold a conversation. You could be on a phone call the entire time. The example that I give folks is if you were on a Teams or a Zoom call and you were getting in your zone 2, they could tell that you were doing something, but not to the point where they have to ask you to repeat yourself and you have to constantly speak in broken sentences. So getting in around 150 minutes of moderate cardio, your 3 strength training sessions, and then somewhere around 15 to 20 minutes of interval style, like really intense cardio. Again, these are general recommendations, but I feel pretty confident that if you are staying consistent with this from a training and recovery protocol, so you've got your 3 strength training sessions, 150 minutes of that moderate intensity, steady state cardio, and then somewhere around 15 to 20 minutes of more of an interval style, like say like 30 seconds on, 90 seconds to 2 minutes off so that you can try to recover as best as you can. Sprint style cardio, doing that stuff for anywhere from really 10 to 20, 15 to 20. I would say past 20 minutes, you probably aren't going like super hard during those work periods. A few other notes that I jotted down: when we are talking about the strength training, also called like your lifting sessions, follow a program that has repeating movements, especially when it comes to your compound movements. Your compound movements would be things like a deadlift, a back squat, bench press we'd put that like in the compound movement standpoint, because you do have to have some bracing in order to make that happen. Your your vertical pressing, your bent over row. Those are like your big movements. For some people, it may be like a leg press instead of a back squat, just depending on what you've got going on. It might be a hip thrust instead of a deadlift. Still following those major movement patterns. But whatever program you follow, again, if you're not following mine, totally understand that. Mine is not the only one that's out there. I mean, I'm not doing anything new here. Just solid, consistent, bread and butter, keeping it simple training. So follow a program that has repeating movements, especially in the compound movements. That is really important. So you want those compound movements repeated for at minimum 6 weeks. Like the training program that I have, by the way, if you'd like access to that, still not publicly released until August here, but you can shoot me a message and I can get you early access. But in the program that I have, although I put out a new block every month, we will have our primary movements. So those big compound movements, those will stay the same for 2 to 3 different training blocks. And then we're just changing a lot of the accessory type stuff each month. Also, when you are doing those smart strength training sessions, somewhere between 8 to 10 hard sets per week per your main muscle groups. So main muscle groups would be things like back, chest, shoulders, glutes, and quads. For many of the women that I build programs for, they're not necessarily looking at doing a ton of chest work. So what we will do, instead of doing like 10 sets for chest and 10 sets for shoulders, we'll do something like 5 sets, 4 to 5 sets, like hard sets of chest per week, and then also do we'll overarch a little bit more on shoulders. Men, the stereotype just tends to live on. Dudes usually like to focus more on chest than women do, and that's all good. So I'll just kind of flip flop those around. Something to also keep in mind is when we're talking 8 to 10 hard sets per week, without getting too far into the weeds, there can also be something that we call like half sets. So for example, let's say somebody's doing like the bench press, for example. Like the bench press is primarily for chest, but it also does hit shoulders. So you could count that as like, it's primarily a chest movement, and we'll give it, 0.5 points out of the 8 for also hitting some shoulders. So just something to think about there. It's also like if you're doing a bent over, like a barbell row or even a single arm dumbbell row, that will hit the back, and also it will hit the bicep too. So it doesn't have to be 10 sets per every single muscle group. That'd be crazy. Although I've seen some pretty wacky things. If you were doing something like, 10 sets for back, shoulders, glutes, quads, hams, triceps, biceps, like just going down that'd be crazy. So, also remember that those sets that we're calling those hard sets, those are somewhere from 1 to 3 reps away from technical failure, like 1 to 3 reps away from your form looking close to really super suspect. Okay. Now, if you're getting to what we call a RIR 1, like reps in reserve 1, like you could only do 1 more rep at the end of that set, most likely your reps are starting to look a little interesting. Like you maybe like that curl, you're maybe kind of leaning back just a little bit, but we don't want it to look like absolutely egregious. Like we don't need it to look like you're trying to do like a kettlebell swing or a dumbbell swing at the same time that you're trying to get the dumbbells up on your bicep curl. All right. Also remember that during your training and recovery, I recommend during your training phase in a recomp phase, also in a body recomp phase, also have some sort of a performance goal in mind, because you're going to be well fueled in body recomp. That is one of the coolest things to me about a body recomp phase being a longer phase. Let's say you're doing it for 6 months, because you are moving intentionally. This is the key. You're moving intentionally through being at maintenance and a deficit. Then rarely are you going to feel completely underfueled, or like you don't have, like you're not taking in enough calories in order to do what you need to do. So having some sort of a performance goal, doing periodic events, whether it be something like a high rocks, if you're into that, whether it be like a Spartan race, a 5K, whatever it might be, whatever you're into, I think that a body recomp phase is a fantastic time to do, to have a performance goal, to do different events and things like that. Again, really, really solid. I'm a big fan of implementing things like that, because you're going to be typically well fueled, and also body recomp is going to likely have periods of being hella boring. That's a scientific term, hella boring, because it's not that phase where you see these astronomical week over week changes, or even 2 weeks over 2 weeks changes. They are small, they're incremental. It's not like you started body recomp on Monday and then on Friday you're just like, oh snap, my pants just won't fit anymore. That's just not the way that body recomp works. Okay. So having something like an event that you're also training for, especially something that's performance based, I think can be fantastic, because it keeps you engaged. It gives you some extrinsic motivation, something to really keep you going. So definitely recommend that. And then last but certainly not least, when it comes to your lower intensity movement, also primarily identified by, how many steps you're getting in your average day, generally somewhere in the 7 to 9,000 range is what I would recommend that you're in when you're in a body recomp phase. Now, can you go higher than that? Absolutely. What I'm identifying here in this 7 to 9,000 steps a day average range is that there's an understanding that it's not a specific phase where you're looking to specifically burn more calories than you're taking in. So, for example, I just was coming across a post from someone who had a fantastic fat loss phase. And one of the things that he talked about, I think it was about a year. Yeah, a year that he's been in this fat loss phase. It's either 12 or 18 months. I can't remember. And one of the things that he talked about is having to up his step goal to 12,000 steps. And he pretty much stuck to that for over a year, 12,000 steps. From a body recomp standpoint, if you generally are in that phase, I would say somewhere in the 7 to 9,000 range is likely going to be completely fine there. All right. So that wraps up the training. And that's where we will, as they say, start to land the plane here. So a few things to quickly recap for you. Body recomp phase, different than specifically fat loss, different than specifically muscle gain, because it is the process of losing fat, building muscle at the same time, with usually minimal changes to overall body weight, or your body weight is not the thing that changes the most about you during that particular phase, again, because you're working on building muscle at the same time that you're losing fat. So it is going to take significantly longer time than a fat loss phase would take. So my unpopular or hot take or unpopular opinion, however you're supposed to frame these polarizing statements these days, my hot take here is that people are lying to you if they say that body recomp is just, it just takes a little longer than fat loss. No, it takes hella longer. And I'm here for it. I enjoy it. So we've got that. And then, ran through the tips around how to handle sleep, how to handle nutrition, how to handle training. And then last, but certainly, again, not least, still pay attention to what is happening, not just in terms of the scale. Also, or maybe even more importantly, pay attention to what's happening with your overall measurements, and still take photos. At minimum, take photos once a month, if not once every other week. I don't recommend weekly photos in body recomp unless you just like to take photos. Like if it just helps you out, cool. Generally, I would recommend every other week, just because there's this, to me, there's this subconscious thing that every time we take photos, we expect that we're going to see something different. And I try to reframe it as, when you take those photos, you're simply checking in, you're taking that data point and you're filing it away. It's like when you check your bank balance, do you really expect to see something different every single time? Not necessarily. You're just checking in to see how things look. You're not necessarily expecting something to look totally different if it's not your payday. So you just roll with it, take the photos again every other week, or at bare minimum every month, file those. Do the same thing with measurements. So take your measurements the same day that you take your photos, to make it easy, and put those into the same kind of bucket that you've got your scale weight. I'm having trouble talking, so it's definitely time to cut this off. So put that all together, make sure you're still tracking along the way. All right. Hopefully that's been helpful. Love to hear what your thoughts are. Are you looking at doing a body recomp phase? Have you done body recomp phases? Is there something that you think maybe I missed? Or are you just like, yo, this was a banger of an episode? And if that's the case, you probably want to leave a 5-star rating and probably leave a review on whatever podcast platform you're listening on. So I appreciate that. If you'd like to reach out to me directly, DMs are open, inbox is open. Hit me up at Coach JK McLeod, MCLEOD, or you can email me jk@jkmcleod.com. Hey, thanks for listening. I do appreciate it. Take care, and I'll talk to you next time. Bye now.